There was a kind of modesty when we made Batman Forever, which was a little bit like we think we can. And, you know, it just felt on Batman and Robin that Jack was out of the box. It just felt like the sky was the limit.
We were on a high, there's no question about it. You have a film that's very successful, Batman Forever, and you have all the elements in place. You say, why not? We had a great time, let's do it again.
Hi, Freeze. I'm Batman.
First movie, things felt much sharper and more focused. And it just felt like everything got a little softer on the second one. The first one, I felt like I was making a movie. The second one, I felt like I was making a toy commercial.
Batman Forever kind of crept up on people. Batman and Robin was so overhyped from the minute we said we were going to do it that I think that backfires many times. You know, when you're supposed to be a blockbuster, then you have to be.
Nice sketch. You break it, you buy it.
Grab the gem! Kill the heroes!
We were just getting ready to shoot A Time to Kill, and Bob Daly and Terry Selmwell called me and asked me if I would do another Batman. And it did seem like the audience and the media and the studio, everybody wanted me to do another one. Now, of course, everyone wanted to be involved. So it was the opposite from Batman Forever when we had to go around and convince everybody to come along with us. We were going to make a Batman movie. This was, how can we stop everybody? You know, I mean, it was everybody and their mother wanted to have their franchise in the movie and be part of it, and it was a very, very different experience.
It was evolving. I mean, it wasn't, I don't think we were publicly saying, okay, we're making another one. We're going straight into the next one. As it turned out, we did pretty much go into the fourth one, the second one for us, almost without a break.
By the time you filmed these movies and got all the press once they came out, you know, to start one up as soon as we did was really soon, I thought. And I think that, you know, ultimately the movie suffered because I think, number one, I don't think people were ready for it. There's something about these things being away for a certain amount of time where people's interest kind of starts to percolate a little bit. I think people were still sick of seeing all the press and all the coverage and all. I mean, it's an assault when these things come out.
In Batman and Robin, there was a real desire at the studio to keep it more family-friendly, more kid-friendly. And a word I had never heard before, more toyetic, which means that what you create makes toys that can sell.
We involved the toy company. We let them look and be involved in how the Batmobile was going to look, how Batman's gadgets were going to be, which they wanted. This is key to them. They need a lot of lead time.
We started planning in August of '95. I knew I wanted to do Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy as the villains, and so we started with tear sheets, comic books, and discussions of what they would look like and how we were going to make Gotham City bigger, better, and what areas we were going to be going into. So all of those things that you're designing, they're ripping them out of your hands because they're going to make the molds. The molds for them usually have to be made in Asia. So you have to give them the designs far in advance so they can get these molds made to make the toys made, so the toys will be out when the movie's coming out. So everything that we did was, can you make it bigger, can you make it better? And I'm not criticizing anyone. I signed on to do this. I was doing this job, but that wasn't a major part of the job.
Can't believe we were fighting over a bad guy.
Bad, yes. Guy, no.
Well, I'm totally over, all right? Positively.
Me too, definitely. Great stems, though.
Buds, too.
Yeah, those are nice.
Oh, the cast was the greatest in the world. I mean, to go to work every day with George Clooney and Chris O'Donnell and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Uma Thurman is just, you know, it doesn't get any better.
Well, I agreed to do another film, The Saint, and they never called the agents and they never called me and told me they were going to go right into production inside of a year.
I was angry at Val and his representatives at the time because they let us know at the last second. That's what I was angry at. I wasn't angry that Val wasn't doing the movie. I was angry that we found out at the 11th hour.
It's still puzzling when I think back. It's almost 10 years already, and I look back and I think, why would they do that? But, you know, it's a business, and those things end up happening.
I met with George Clooney, who was just great. He's just one of the greatest guys in the world. I thought he'd be a charming, handsome Batman.
There's a minute there that you go, well, do I want to be the third Batman in the fourth Batman picture? That can be a little worrisome because the other three were very successful, and the only thing you can do is screw it up. That's really the only result, you know? So I didn't think that there were that many things to gain career-wise by doing it, but on the other hand, I get a chance to be in this huge event movie.
I think Joel wanted him not to be too serious in the Bat role, which is the way I think that he played it and felt comfortable playing it. There's a little more humor and fun in his than the previous Batman.
The thing is, you got to remember, Michael started this and he made it his own. You know, Batman was Batman, and Michael will always be Batman because of that. And then Val came in and did something completely different. And he was a darker, very strong, very brooding character. So for me, there weren't many options in the fourth Batman. And we talked about this because there were some pages originally written that had him, you know, dealing with his parents being dead again. And I said, you know, he's a 35-year-old guy who lives in a giant mansion and has billions of dollars and goes out with the most beautiful women in the world and has the coolest toys and is Batman. And I don't think anybody is going to feel sorry for and listen to a guy going, woe is me, my parents died when I was 4. So the only thing we tried to do was give him a little less weight to carry on his shoulders.
Because we were supposed to make a more family-friendly movie, I would make a gentler, kinder, kind of, maybe not as depressed, not as tortured Batman. I know I've been criticized a lot for this, but I didn't see the harm in it.
The Batman thing I wasn't ever wholly comfortable with because it's very tough to be comfortable as Batman. You kind of have to cop a different kind of attitude. You have to cop this extremely confident, invulnerable kind of man. Much easier to catch Bruce Wayne.
We had to shoot around his schedule because he was shooting ER at the time. So we shot Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. We would try not to schedule him on Friday, so he'd get 3 days in a row. He'd get Wednesday, Thursday, Friday on ER. I mean, the guy is amazing. He worked 7 days a week for months. I mean, actually, as it turned out.
I want a car. Chicks dig the car.
This is why Superman works alone.
It was fun to go back and do it again, and with different people. You know, I was kind of bummed out at the timing, because I just had things going on, other things I wanted to do. But at the same time, you know, I had a great experience doing these Batman movies, and I got to travel all over the world doing publicity. I mean, publicity can be a miserable thing, but you know, if you look at it just as a great experience to go around the world and from a business standpoint, get a lot of exposure, I really enjoyed it. You know, even though looking back, I felt like we kind of rushed getting that second one done. You know, I still would have done it, you know, if I had the chance over.
I'm a director that is very cast dependent. I only have usually one choice for each role. And until I'm really turned down, I don't fall in love with anyone else. And so I've been very lucky to get my first choices on most of my movies. Arnold seemed a perfect fit, you know, this big Austrian, you know, scary guy in the metal suit.
Allow me to break the ice. My name is Freeze. Learn it well, for it's the chilling sound of your doom.
Joel Schumacher was the motivating force for me to do Batman. Although I have seen all the other Batmans and I have enjoyed them thoroughly, and was always interested in, of course, playing the ultimate villain in one of those movies. I didn't really think much about it until Joel Schumacher came to me and said that he would like me to play Mr. Freeze. I would not direct the movie because I only can do this movie if you play Mr. Freeze. So what are you gonna do? I mean, screw up a whole movie? He made me feel like I would make this whole thing fall apart if I'm not part of this whole. So he made me feel like, you know, King Kong. So I said, you know, I called him the next day and I said, you know something, Joe, I'm going to do Mr. Freeze.
Hi there.
And you are?
Poison. Poison Ivy.
I'd been a huge fan of Uma Thurman's since The Seashell opened in Baron Munchausen, and she was Venus. And the minute it was printed that we were going to have a villainess named Poison Ivy, The one-liner that went under it was the most beautiful woman in the world, but if you kiss her, you die. Well, the most beautiful woman in the world are fighting words in Hollywood. Everybody saw themselves as the most beautiful woman in the world. It's my Gotham City, and I think that Uma Thurman is one of the most beautiful women in the world. And besides great beauty, I needed a great actress also with a sense of humor.
Uma had a lot of great ideas about what she should be like, this kind of warped woman. She was there for a long time, and I got her right at the beginning, so I think I got the best of her even. And we kept having to do that kiss over and over again. That was so hard, you know?
To be a Batman villain is like, in the movies, in a comic pop kind of way, it's sort of like an opera part. You know, it's limitless. Someone said to me, you can't be too big and you can't be too small. But there's just, the opportunities are endless with the characters. And so it was just tempting. I've never done anything like it, and it doesn't come by very often.
I think because a lot of critics bashed the movie, I think they overlooked Uma's performance, which I think is great.
And you are?
Batgirl.
That's not awfully PC. What about bad person or bad woman?
Bruce, it's me, Barbara.
I thought that in this mode of making a more family-friendly, more kid-friendly movie, to give maybe little girls more of an access into Batman. I realized that there weren't really any superheroines, especially teenage ones, in our culture, which is sort of unusual. I don't know what that says about us, but there was no one better than Alicia Silverstone to be Batgirl.
I actually had no idea that there was a Batgirl. I watched the series and I was really into the Catwoman character and really into the Joker and the Riddler, but I didn't know of Batgirl at all.
1, 2, 3, action!
Using feminine wiles to get what you want. Yeah! Oh! Curses!
I think we want to be served up something with a lot of psychological complexity and darkness when we do these movies. I mean, I think that there's a certain component of the fan base who will literally think I am the personification of the other, but in fact, the truth is, what I believe these movies need are as much darkness and complexity as they can have. Sometimes you get some going, sometimes you don't.
Joel knew where he wanted to go with the picture, and Joel likes it very bubbly. He doesn't like it too serious. Let's not take ourselves too seriously here. We're making a Batman movie. We're making a comic book, a live comic book.
Batman, Robin. Before a take, Joel would pick up his megaphone, his bullhorn, and go, "Remember, everybody, it's a cartoon." So that kind of set the tone and the style of Joel's Batman.
The whole approach was much more glossy and theatrical. It was all a totally different look to Tim's film, which was all dark and shadows. But I can also understand, as you progress through 1, 2, 3, 4 films, that maybe you have to change the look, otherwise the audience think, oh, I've seen this, you know, so.
There's no way I can explain it to you other than I had no idea that putting nipples on the Bat costume were going to be international headlines. The bodies for the suits the inspiration for them are Greek statues that have perfect bodies. And so we're molding this perfect body in rubber, and they're anatomically erotic. And so it never occurred to me not to put nipples on the men's suits because I didn't know that the male nipple was a controversial body part. Then I was left with the dilemma of what to do with Batgirl. Because if we didn't give her nipples, then we would have seemed sexist, I think, to have left her out. So hers are a little subtler.
You know, it wasn't so much the nipples for me as it was the codpiece. You know, the press obviously kind of, you know, with Joel directing, of course, they kind of played that up a little bit, but I didn't think twice about it. Although now I kind of look back at some of the pictures and I'm like, that is a little unusual, I suppose.
Val Kilmer and Chris O'Donnell's codpieces were exactly the same size. Chris is shorter, so it looked bigger. The joke was on the set that Chris had tipped Jose, the great sculptor, to make his bigger, all right? So then George came into the picture, and George asked me in the early press conferences to please tell everyone that Val's suit fit him perfectly, but we had to make the codpiece larger to accommodate him.
I asked for a bigger package. Apparently Chris was tipping the costumer, but I did get a nice ass.
Even though the job has enormous pressures and responsibilities, you're making a Batman comic. And, you know, in comic books, they draw up very beautiful, anatomically perfect people in very alluring costumes, and we owe that to the audience. But I will take responsibility for casting and glorifying beauty and sexuality in this. That's part of the fun of a Batman comic book.
1, 2, 3, action!
There is a serious nature to this, that when it's time to rock, it's time to rock.
The main unit really had to concentrate on the money, the actors. I guess why I quite enjoyed doing second units now, not first units, because you have the fun stuff. It's tough, but you have the fun stuff. Museum was tough because originally we had the whole museum frozen so they could do it on ice skates. The whole, I mean, it's a huge set at Warner's was an ice rink with a set built on it. And then about 3 days before that, they decided they would do it on rollerblades. So we got these extreme skaters in there who are actually fantastic.
Let's turn cameras.
Okay, roll cameras. We're rolling. We're rolling cameras, rolling. Okay, action, Rick.
I always kind of, when I'd see the movie, I'd laugh and think, I don't really remember doing that scene. And I'm like, that's not me. I mean, there were literally 3 crews at all time. And in fact, I'm in a lot of scenes with Mr. Freeze. I never worked a single day with Arnold. Not a single day. I was on the set with him a lot. You know, I'd hang out and talk to him. I did a lot of publicity with him. But literally, they had a double for him that was so good, and that suit was so complicated and involved to get on, that unless Arnold was talking in a scene, he wasn't in that costume. It was a movie where there were a lot of doubles.
They never wanted Batman to be seen as not an icon. In other words, they didn't want George or Val to be standing there with the cowl just talking, having a Diet Coke on the set. There was either, you know, George Clooney or Bruce Wayne or Batman.
Whenever we're making a Batman type of movie, everybody is very, very careful about not letting too much get out of the box and making it public until we're sure where we're going. Security on things like the script is very high. Security on the set's very high.
George and I, when they had like these silver suits that we were in, they were so nervous about people seeing them and people stealing things. They had people walking with giant poster boards as we came out of our trailers going into the set, covering us.
The studio security and I decided that we would put up a metal detector. And we had a very large crowd that day, somewhere around 200, 250 people. They go to a specific stage where the wardrobe is going to be, but the first thing they got to do is, as they get off the bus, is go through a metal detector. I think we got 500 cameras from 200 people. They had cameras stuffed everywhere, and it was just a nightmare. Security aspects of making a movie like this is a nightmare.
One of the Batman heads turned up missing. I mean, suddenly every single car that left that lot, they were searching trunks, everything, every car for weeks. People were so mad that they were filming Batman on the set because they were so sick of having their cars searched. And then they caught a guy on the set one day that, you know, had a hidden video camera, and it was like a sting operation. I mean, it was unbelievable. But it kind of all added to the like mystique of the movie and the production. You know, like, oh, you can't believe what's going on. And I mean, it was entertaining just being on the set.
There were days when there were 150 visitors during the day, and people would bring their kids. People would come to see the sets. It sort of became a thing to do.
Major people would want to come visit the set, you know, either because they had kids or whatever. But every day you'd kind of, you know, come back from lunch or go to the makeup trailer and be like, oh, did you see who was here? And you're like, every day, just these crazy stars. What were they doing here? Oh, they just wanted to see the sets. So it was like a zoo, I swear. It was literally like a zoo.
The movies, to me, have always reflected a different era from the Batman mythology. To me, Tim Burton's first film was truly the Batman of 1939 before Robin came in. Batman Returns was more of Tim's tribute to the Batman comics, the way they were portraying the character in the 1990s. Batman Forever, pure middle of the 1940s to the middle of the 1950s. And Batman and Robin clearly was all about the Batman of the 60s in the comic books. So I think that a fan's perspective or an audience's perspective on these movies is different depending on what age group they are in and what type of Batman comics they grew up reading.
I think the reaction to fans, generally, especially the more avid fans, is they were hoping that we would have gone a little darker than Batman Forever. We didn't do that. We went the way it is. It had been some years between the second one and the first one we did, the one with Val. And I think probably the studio would like to maybe have had another year. I don't think we would have made it any better, but I think they would have, just in terms of the audience, the core base, I think they would probably like to have had another year between.
The merchandising and licensing became a very, very important part of the making of the film. But I also have to say, I was an adult, I was awake, and I went along with it. So I'm not pointing a finger at anyone else and saying, they made me do this, all right? I was there.
I think what the conclusion was is probably the same place Tim Burton was after two of them. It is an extensive part of your life. I mean, it's 4 years out of probably a 40, 45-year life, a work life. So you've just spent 10% of your entire work life on two productions.
The studio wanted me to do a fifth Batman, which would have been my third, which would have featured the Scarecrow. And I just couldn't do it. It wasn't really in me anymore. It has to be a true passion. It can't be a job. And it can't be because people expect you to do it. If there's anybody watching this that, let's say, loved Batman Forever and went into Batman and Robin with great anticipation, if I disappointed them in any way, then I really want to apologize, because it wasn't my intention. My intention was just to entertain them.
You know, I felt very much, and still do, that we were doing exactly what you're supposed to do. I leave the opinion of quality to the individual viewer, but what you're supposed to do with icons is contort them. I mean, the reason that comic books survive over time is that the characters are durable and they are afforded different realizations. They're different lenses through which to see the world. They change and are changed by the world, by the time, by the historical moment that they're in. And without those aborted and perhaps less successful bends and twists, you never get Dark Knight Returns. You will never, ever find a Clint Eastwood version of Batman. And those are the things we want. And that's what we yearn for. We yearn for something old made new spectacularly. And so, you know, that's the job. The job is stand it on its head and see if it stands up or falls down.
I remember years ago, Jerry Weintraub introduced me to Colonel Tom Parker, who, you know, discovered and managed Elvis. And he told me that Elvis was such an icon that after Elvis died, he could just send the suit around the United States and make a fortune on the suit. Batman is like Elvis. It's really the suit that is the star, which is not to take away from Michael Keaton or Adam West or George Clooney or Val Kilmer, but it's Batman who's the star. And Batman's gonna go on long after us. I'm not worried about Batman.
The set designers and those sort of people are so important because there's a real look and the feel that they're going for. And as an actor, you kind of think of the character and the scenes you're in and stuff, but you don't spend all your time the way the director or the other creative people would as far as the look and feel of it. So I didn't know exactly what to expect. And then as we got on all the different sets and things started to kind of get shot, you got a little more feel for it.
Was bigger and bolder, and it was a much more massive scaled Batman, more characters. That was the biggest change, is that you had a lot more villains and good guys. We had Poison Ivy and Bane and Mr. Freeze and Batgirl.
Alfred, it's me.
There's a lot of new characters and a lot of environments to put them in.
Well, I think they just made it bigger and taller. I think Barbara just made Gotham City bigger and taller, and of course we had new characters with new gimmicks.
Joel very much wanted to open this movie up and to get more outside, get into more crowd sequences, get into a larger, who are the people who live in Gotham? And that is always going to be a challenge, is how do you do Gotham by day? You know what I mean? What does that look like by day? It's such a night city. We created long scopes of streets to try to be able to just open it up to the city, more. It's exciting to be within the city streets of Gotham rather than just be in fabulous big interiors for sequences. So we opened it up much bigger.
The look of it is like the biggest stage in the world, because it's the Batman stages and the sets were just enormous, and it looks like Warner Brothers spent every penny on it that they ever had. But and it looks, just really unique and different in every way, and colorful and exciting.
Well, you're in one of the sets right now. You can't really see it, but in here is this, probably the biggest set I've ever seen, biggest built set I've ever seen. It's a couple $1 million, this set. I remember walking in here and they had this giant dinosaur that I'd come sliding down, and it's huge, this big Sinclair dinosaur thing, And I remember looking at it, and I walked in and I said, Jesus, Joel, I'm intimidated. And Joel's like, so am I. I'm intimidated. It's the biggest thing I've ever seen.
Batman and Robin was really the motif of bringing more of a World's Fair proportion, even on a larger scale to it. And to bring in the idea of metals and really kind of almost going back to a sense of Raymond Loewy and the machine age. If you look, you'll notice it's a very metal world, more than Batman Forever. Poison Ivy, the idea came up to do a Turkish bath, which was very fun, to be able to have this dilapidated old Turkish bath that she transforms into her plant lair.
She creates a mini version of what her ultimate plan is, which is basically her own style of Garden of Eden. And she builds one in a abandoned Turkish bathhouse. And it's quite beautiful, the set that they made. She lives in a gigantic orchid throne and has vines and plants that are at her control, growing up all and down the ceilings and everything.
Mr. Freeze has a habitat and has a hangout place, and of course his hangout place is on the deep freeze, and so he can comfortably live there in his hangout place without having to wear this heavy armor.
These sequences with Mr. Freeze's world in Batman and Robin is that you were in ice. Whenever the ice would freeze, it created a very bright situation. So if you froze the museum then became a very bright reflection. And I think that the lending of that one being so bright became all the ice. His world came from such a scientific background. We played with everything being in these chromes. Everything worked off the sense of this. He lives within a metal suit. And because of that, his world is within a metal box, so to speak. I loved the different types of ways to play with metal in his world. That was a giant amount of street to really freeze, and the proportion of freezing buildings and doing giant, sculptures. So you had to shoot it first with unfrozen, and then you had to shoot the entire thing frozen, and it was huge. I mean, that was, 2 city blocks, and had everything frozen, and that wasn't done in CGI, that was done real world, so that was pretty wild. We loved the idea of this diaphanous floating, So it's this beautiful woman just floating in water and the hair moving and this diaphanous outfit kind of, and that he could walk in and speak to her, and because of course his idea was to bring her back to life. And that's, the idea of this beautiful cylinder. But, again, that it is a difficult thing to make. It was difficult. It was an amazingly difficult feat to make that look good. We had a full prosthetic made of her that we tested endlessly to get hair to move to. It is, something like that takes months to perfect. Months. Just one little sequence. I think designing the weapons for the bad guys too became I think the fight sequences became bigger in this, so they needed to have their world gadgets also, and that became very important to Joel, that there be things that were specifically for that character for these next sequences, so that Mr. Freeze guns and Poison Ivy, knives became part of these giant fight sequences. With the Bat gadgets, the challenge is what can we make up that a gadget hasn't done yet, We had it stick to the ceiling, we've had a gadget do this, we've had a gadget do that. And then once you come up with something new that a gadget can do, is how to redesign that gadget to be even cooler than the gadget before it.
I've been working for about a year now on Batman's weapons and Robin's weapons. They're all very shiny, polished aluminum. They're actually cast out of aluminum. What I do is I start out with real rough sketches, and I show them to Barbara. She will approve a couple of them, kind of give me a direction to go in. She'll say, I like parts of this one, I like parts of that one. And I'll do refined versions, much like this. Real simple sketch. And once she approves this version, then I'll go ahead and do a mechanical drawing that is either turned over to the effects guys and they build a fully functional prop, or if I have time, then I build them myself sometimes.
The life of this series is that, and hopefully there's 10 more of these, and they just keep playing with something new, or you would just be bored. You wouldn't want to see the same thing over and over again, I think.
It was fun to go to work every day. We were creating, our own world. Brilliant, imaginative, creative people around.
It's an incredible feeling to think that you designed something, just the proportions of it were, mind-boggling. And then to see it finished and lit is just, there's no feeling like it. It is the greatest sense of accomplishment.
The Batmobile was just a bigger, more souped-up version of the one we'd had before.
Everything was more, bigger,
all the way around,
more dramatic.
The accountants at the studio would love us to have gone to the storage and got out the old Batmobile. They said, look, we got two of them sitting back there. Why don't you go and get one of those? Just wouldn't have fit. You couldn't have put that Batmobile in our movie.
Don't leave home without it.
I think fans of Batman want to come and see a new gadget designed that's going to be different from the gadgets of the last movie.
The old Batmobile would save us a hell of a lot of money. I mean, it's a Batmobile. The first one's real expensive. The second one is reasonable priced, but the first one is really, really expensive.
It all comes down to really how great your shop is, I think, with vehicles. And we use great guys at TFX.
I got a call from Barbara. Barbara said, we're going to make another Batman. Can you believe it?
You now know, if I could do it one more time, I would do.
It was a very lucky day that I met with a friend who said, Batman is starting up and they're looking for a vehicle designer. It started out to be based on classic 50s cars with big fenders. We spent a lot of time working out a shape that sort of morphs out of a bullet. So I think that was dropped at some point because the transition was just too crazy over the top. Can't believe I said that.
the inspiration became more the silhouette, becoming something larger, becoming more of a sleek, almost kind of knife cutting through the night sky, so to speak. And the idea of being able to see the engine as something on its own. We gave them a drawing, they would digitize the drawing, and then we'd cut it out of foam as a miniature. And then I could reshape once they put that into clay, then look at the full scale with it.
Barbara had a vision of this single-seat, open car. Let's make Batman part of the Batmobile. Let's see him sitting in there. So we put it in the center, as far back into the vehicle as we could, and made as long a vehicle.
Longest in history, possibly.
Yeah, we even cheated the front track so it's wider than the rear track so that it looked like it was this ominous thing that was coming at you and was never going to stop. It was also painted gloss black, and gloss black, you know, is the worst color for showing imperfections in the surface. So a huge effort went into absolutely perfect vehicle surfaces.
The car was really complex. It had a lot of different systems on it. It was basically a NASCAR chassis. The driver had his own fire system. On top of that, the flame system had its own CO2 purge system. Redundant electrical had 12-volt systems, 110-volt systems. The effects lighting was separate from the operation of the vehicle. A lot of them could be operated from the cockpit. There's also radio control on it, so that all the driver really had to do is hold the wheel and drive the car.
It was fun to see the Batmobile drive, really more than anything, was to be able to have some sort of sense of what this machine can do.
One of the systems that I think was the most unique was the nose of the vehicle had to look like it had multiple rings revolving in different directions. One of our designers proposed an idea where we would place openings strategically cut, and he would change the speed of how fast this cone turned.
That was something that's a really simple idea, but we had to go to the camera, find out what the frame rate they were shooting, shoot the cone, and dial the speed so that it was matched so that the camera would see it correctly. So there was some prep time, and as far as Batmobiles and Batman movies, that's the money shot, yeah.
The lighting was also chasing the interior on a lot of electroluminescence paper, and it almost looked like a pinball machine in terms of all the different things that were going on there. But in terms of their function, they really didn't show up as something other than just in a couple of spots where, you know, he used it to communicate. Creating a flame that actually projects straight out is a challenge, and the way we solved it was we basically built mini rocket motors.
We shot nitrous oxide as an oxidizer down the middle to oxidize the fuel so it wouldn't just wick out, it would actually burn. So they're pretty hot.
We had to acquire special tires from Goodyear, and I had some contacts with Goodyear and asked them to cut bat tread in what's considered a prototype tire. They call them smooth mold tires. They're produced so that the tire companies can try out different treads. To some degree, I kind of regret it because the car was so spectacular in terms of the rest of it. Everybody always noticed the tires.
When we roll it around, you can see that it would leave bats, bat trail.
Little bats everywhere. For Batman and Robin, there was just one Batmobile. I think the only Batmobile that exists as a single unit. There was never another one built. Then Mr. Freeze's truck, which was also a one-off. Other than that, the rest of the vehicles, there was at least two. Robin's motorcycle, the Redbird, there were four. The ice vehicles for Batgirl, Batman, and Robin, there were two each on all of those. Primarily because there were a lot of stunts that were being performed, a lot of different setups that had to happen with those. And they had a similar theme.
Batman always had the bigger, more luxurious, more elegant vehicle. Robin, for the street, had the Redbird, and then he had the Skiff, which was smaller.
It was a snowmobile chassis with this enormous fan on the back. Charlie and I said, well, you know, we can simulate these vehicles driving on ice without actually going on ice. We can put tires and hide them on the snowmobiles. And we talked about where they race snowmobiles on asphalt, which is kind of a crazy sport, but they actually do it. And they replace the front skids with very small skateboard wheels. It saved us all a lot of anguish, I think.
We had to put supplemental cooling systems on the snowmobiles because they cool by radiating the heat out onto snow that splashed up in the bottom plate. And we actually had to put radiators in them and all, integrate them, but they converted over pretty well. They ran.
Don't wait up, Al.
The Redbird, the motorcycle, was a very sleek speed form in the beginning with a long tail.
We kind of did a play on the furthest scale of Japanese bikes that would morph, and then putting in kind of the Robin symbol, the way the wings flap around on the sides of that, and that became a very exciting vehicle.
The Batmobile on two wheels thing, and you turn, it was, you know, you're almost gonna fall over. This thing was like, I was afraid to drive it.
Mr. Freeze's vehicle, I started with Raymond Loewy's Deco 30s locomotive. You know, I loved the shape of that. And we played with that and everything coming out of it, that it dug through things.
We made it out of foam with about 6 layers of fiberglass on it for structure. And then we had some soft aluminum. We bought it in rolls and had it sent to a place where they actually applied adhesive on the back, self-peel adhesive. We cut off and actually applied to the surface and then pressed rivets and appeared like it was metal. But it's actually metal surface, but it was underlying was fiberglass.
The other interesting thing was absolutely almost quiet because it was run by an electric motor. So it was this big silent silver shape, that shiny aluminum shape that looked like a locomotive.
It was one thing to see it sitting there, but as soon as it started moving, wow.
Lots and lots of neon, lots of LEDs, lots of chasing lights. The point that Barbara wanted to make is that there's an immense power or an immense complexity to this amazing piece of equipment that he drives around in. So to get that across in the nighttime...
What do you have to work with other than lighting?
Yeah, so...
Otherwise it's dark.
It had to be massive, because the suit itself was massive.
The first version we built didn't fit through the door.
Oh, the door on the set.
So we had to go back and start over and make another
Narrow it up. The piece we had that we didn't use, we actually used for the punch the wall scene. We gutted it for that, so that worked out okay. Now! Had a chance to go back and it's really rare in life. If I could do it again, I would. Well, we had a chance.
There was just so much freedom and so much joy in designing something like the Batmobile. To see things then come real was just fantastic.
Alfred is very efficient.
Yeah,
to get all that stuff built.
He's got a crew of elves, I think.
Yeah,
but,
something. We couldn't figure it out. But he's pretty
we're Alfred's elves, I guess.
We had new characters with new gimmicks. The costumes are brilliant costumes, and the makeup and hair, it's the same team. Everything just got bigger.
We had taken a giant leap from the Michael Keaton film and then had built on that from the Val film to the George Clooney film. And at that point, you know, you have the same group of people that had been working on the same problem for 2.5 years.
We can design a piece that fits into here. So
well, we can certainly do scenes with and without it.
On all those movies, you have the common link of the costume designer and Bob Ringwood's interpretation of the original vision and then the development of that. And I presume Warner Brothers' concerned that there is some follow-through from one to another.
And then what we're going to do is this gets painted, then the glove comes to a line, and then it'll go to a point on the glove.
I don't think we ever had it that well worked out. I think it was just a creative process. Deals with, okay, we have this suit, now where are we going to go from here on out?
There's something about an anatomically correct rubber suit that puts fire in a girl's lips.
They wanted to basically have it feel human in a way and yet very sort of animal in a way, if that makes any sense to you. And it was trying to come up with that sort of combination that just worked. And I think Joel loved the idea of having nipples on it, as I recall back now.
Joel Schumacher is the man who put the nipples on the Batsuit. That's what Joel Schumacher did. And it amazes me that that could have offended as many people as apparently it did.
Bob really wanted the blue-black suit on that movie. And in the beginning, we loved the blue-black because it was more like the comic where you get the blue highlight on the black. But then we found out later that it didn't hide as many sins as the all-black suits did. If they got a scratch or a cut in it, it showed. The cape attachment was a different thing. The original one, it came from here, and this one we had some machine parts milled so that the cape actually came from one place and rotated. So we hired a guy from aerospace industry to mill the pieces for us so that we could have this really sleek closure on the cape. The heads were the hardest part to run because they were a 360 thing. There was no seam in them. So those were usually, the nose was the one where we got the most air bubbles. That was a problem. And the ears, the only ears at the end of the ear would come off.
I tell you, all right, got a little wax in my ear.
All the guys complain about their costumes, all right? That they're heavy, they're hot, and they are. They weigh over 50 pounds, and they're brutal to wear.
The actors get extremely hot, even though keeping a little air conditioner on him all the time when he's off camera, so it cools down the outside of the suit, so he's not running in water.
The bat suit's a little trickier. The problem is everything covers your ears are completely blocked, and your eyesight is like that, and everything is up underneath your throat, and everything is about 2 sizes too small, You're just clamped in. You can really only stay in for about 15 minutes before, if you're doing any kind of thing physical, before you have to get out.
Whee! I'm Batman!
You can't put your hands in your pockets, Great actors' tools like cigarettes and things, Batman doesn't get them, So you don't have anything to do with your hands, so you gotta just stand there like that.
I got mine. Where's yours?
Making a Robin suit and a Batman suit, the only real difference in the production of it is that you start the sculpt on this actor's cast or that actor's cast, but in the end, the processes are all the same. The paint choice is maybe a little different at the end, but to make a Bat or a Robin is pretty much exactly the same thing.
The only difference between the Batman and Robin suits are Batman has calves and forearms, even though you don't see them because they're covered in boots and gloves, and Robin doesn't.
The Robin suits on this movie were a little more grown up, a little more muscular. The colors were a little darker. It wasn't this Technicolor, so it was more like the dark side of Robin a little bit on this movie.
There was something about putting that suit on, and it just made you want to, be a superhero, and you really you kind of bought into it. It was just this amazing body and this thing.
And 1, 2, 3, action!
When kids would come on the set, it was unbelievable. I mean, they would literally be speechless.
Bruce, it's me, Barbara.
Batgirl was a different thing because on all of the Robin and the Bat, you're trying to add bulk to them to get them to be this perfect male figure. And for female, there's only a couple places you can do that, and the rest of it, you're trying to keep as slim as possible.
You're about to become compost.
Batgirl had a lot of flipping and kicking and fighting, and she had these boots that are up to here with really high heels. And so most of the thing that we changed on the Batgirl was the heels. We cast some that looked exactly like the high heels in foam so that when she ran, she could run a little more flat-footed and not be on such a high heel, and then we made some of them with a much shorter heel. It made them look like the original boots. But that was the hardest thing, and there was no place to hide a flying harness on that costume.
I guess that, we all are supposed to be fit because of the fact that you're going to wear this heavy, heavy costume and you need to be able to run around and have your endurance be good so that you can manage the whole day with this suit on. But I spent so much time complaining in that costume that I didn't see any payoff. You don't notice that because I'm physically fit that I would be more comfortable in the suit.
On the days that they wore the costume, V. Neal and her crew would have to paint around the eye area so that the mask that went on blended nicely to the skin color underneath. Robin and Batgirl's mask was glued onto their face, not strapped on with little straps like you were at a birthday party.
Batgirl was kind of fun to do because we didn't really want to black out her eyes, so we didn't even give her a black mask. Her mask was kind of an opalescent dark blue, so I mixed up a kind of dark blue frosted eyeshadowy type thing that I painted around her eyes that kind of matched her mask. It was a neat combination of a black and a blue frosted on top, so it kind of gave her a little bit more of a softer look with her blonde hair for her whole new look.
No sign of the snowman.
Maybe he melted.
When they morph into another suit, we only had about 3 weeks to produce those suits at the end of the movie. So we went back and took some of the ones from the movie before and cast the silver pieces onto those suits and then glued them on.
You ride?
Felt like I was making a toy commercial. I mean, literally. It was, all of a sudden, we were in like these new suits. I'm like, okay, so I'm just trying to think of the story of how this works. It's like, let's not ask questions. We've got new silver suits, okay? It's just the way it is.
I need a sign.
How about slippery when wet?
Poison Ivy went round and round for a long time. She was down to the wire on that costume. My involvement with her was mostly in the beginning, where I had to find resources for the latex rubber. 'Cause at that point, it wasn't a big fad and fashion, and figure out if you could dye it and what you could do with it, and painting and dyeing to get the combination of colors on it.
It informs you a lot about the character. And this sort of swagger that she has is very much, she's wearing thigh-high boots and a rubber costume. I mean, you're not going to walk around sheepishly. It's a brave look.
Tell me your plan.
Kiss me and I'll tell you.
One thing I would love to have done, we never did do it, is for the Poison Ivy costume. When she morphed into a fighting machine, Bob wanted her to be very menacing. And there are all of these trees around Los Angeles with all the spikes and the thorns on them. They're sort of a green bark and they get pink flowers on them.
We molded some trees to get the spikes, but I think we sort of ran out of time at the end and didn't get to go with that.
What are you, about a 50 big and tall?
No, I always go a size smaller. Makes me look slimmer.
The designs layer after layer after layer, but they are one of the most beautiful things I've ever gotten to work on.
Everything freezes.
It is shiny, it's beautiful chrome armor that they usually wear when they go out and fight the battles. And it is an armor that is truly like in the old days of the knights, an armor like that weighs 60 or 70 pounds, and you carry this thing around all day. Don't you feel sorry for me already?
I always say it was the refrigerator meets the Terminator.
I will pull Batman's heart from his body and feel it freeze in my hands.
I worked under Master Terry English, and we did the Mr. Freeze suit for about 6 months. We did 7 full metal suits. The suits themselves were completely hand-hammered out of aluminum. They're aircraft aluminum. And there was about 10,000 blue LEDs per suit. From what we understand, we bought every blue LED in the continental United States. There was over 500 parts. That's not counting the LEDs as individual pieces, all the way down to little tiny hand-bashed rondelles, little tiny round pieces that we had to custom cut. Some of the stuff was machined at a different shop, but the majority of everything was custom made by us and hand-hammered out by us.
The laborious part of a suit is going to the wardrobe shop while they're making it and putting on just this piece and being able to feel how it moves on your shoulder. He must have been at the wardrobe, I would say, 10 times over the course of the manufacturing the suit.
They were very comfortable, believe it or not, because they move in so many different directions. Everything is jointed well so that you're not fighting it. It moves where you want it to move. If you had to, you could do a shoulder roll in that suit. Wouldn't be very comfortable, but you could do it. I actually wore one of the Freeze suits. Arnold and I were exactly the same size. So they put the suit on me, and I did all the karate kicks and was doing all sorts of stuff in these suits because Terry wanted to make sure that these fit Arnold, that they worked well. I remember Joel Schumacher walked in and I was leaping from table to table in one of the suits. He looked at me, turned around and went back out. It was like, I don't want to know.
If revenge is a dish best served cold, then put on your Sunday finest.
The reason why the Batman films look so good is because the people working on it many times love what they're doing. And I think that's the key. If you really love what you're doing, it will show in the product.
I still feel that this movie has best manufacture, best design, best concept of a superhero. I mean, the costume I think is great. It's sexy.
My first thought was this: okay, Jeff Dawn is going to handle Arnold, so I don't have to worry about Mr. Freeze. He's going to take care of that so I can focus on Poison Ivy because she goes through a big transformation. We had Batgirl, we've got Robin again, and we have a new Batman now. Now we have George Clooney. Oh boy, I love that. We had a whole new set of people and new set of fun things to do, and as usual, we had a lot of makeup people. A lot of makeup on those films.
Pheromone dust, designed to heat a man's blood. It doesn't work on a cold-hearted.
My job on Batman and Robin was to run the Mr. Freeze unit, we called it.
Let me guess. Blind girl?
The first unit character, which of course was Arnold. Then we had doubles for Arnold on first unit and on second unit. And we had photo doubles also. So in all, there were 11 people working for me on first and second unit, creating all these Mr. Freezes. There were several different stages of Mr. Freeze makeup in the movie. There was Arnold as himself before he became Mr. Freeze, with his normal hair, his normal skin tone. Then we had the scientist as he was coming out of a vat of liquid nitrogen. He was going through the whole Mr. Freeze process. We had the Mr. Freeze look.
I hate when people talk during the movie.
And we had the Mr. Freeze at the end where he was very sick and dying.
Take 2 of these and call me in the morning.
The challenge was to create a makeup that makes the face and the body look as if I really have gone through this dramatic accident where all the hair has frozen off. There's no body here anywhere left.
Long before we started filming, I approached Arnold and said, Arnold, I've given this a lot of thought. This will be best if you shave your head. It'll be faster in the morning. We'll save at least 45 minutes to an hour. Much more comfortable, and it's gonna look better. But if I did shave his head, he would go home at night. Maria, his wife, would see this. She would say, what did you do? You promised me before you left this morning you weren't gonna shave. That idiot Jeff, he attacked me with a razor today. And to this day, Maria would be very, very upset at me. I don't want that. So in the long run, I'm glad that it went the way it did. It looked great. Arnold was able to, as he says, have his cake and eat it too. He had his hair for the entire film, and we had a bald Mr. Freeze.
And then, of course, you have to make the eyebrows disappear. And even the nose hair disappear. Every single hair with the silhouette lighting and all those kind of things, you have to make sure that all the hair in the body is gone. Otherwise, it does not look believable. Then a certain color had to be created. What does a human being really look like when he's frozen? He created a certain kind of a gray look to the whole thing. Then it was filmed many, many times to create different shades and sparkles and stuff like that with a combination of blue and gray.
I heard you were blue.
Slowly we developed then a look for the whole face and for the head and all that. So because some scenes were without the armor, and with some scenes, of course, were with the heavy armor and with then the helmet that lit up inside to keep the brain frozen and all those kind of things. To make it sure that it always, when you look at Mr. Freeze, it looks like this is not a thing that is alive. So that when you look in the eyes, it looked very spooky. As a matter of fact, my kids came on a set one time, and this was the first time I saw them running away and say, I want to have nothing to do with this man.
Dr. Isley? Pamela? You look great. Especially for a dead woman.
Hello, Jason.
My first thought was, well, can we get Uma for tests? Well, I believe Uma was on a different film at the time and couldn't get in, so I did a lot of tests on another young lady to see all these different looks. And by the time Uma got there, I showed Uma some photographs of some of these test makeups that I had done. And she goes, oh my, I've never worn that much makeup. I don't know that I can wear that much makeup. And I said, you know, it'll be fine. It's going to be a gradual transformation. And she was allowed to transform little by little. And kind of a funny thing happened at the very end when she's floating on that water thing. She had so much makeup on and was so done up for this final transformation. We were sitting in the makeup trailer and she looks at me, she goes, do you think it's enough? Is it far enough to go? And I had to like step back for a minute and have a little giggle to myself.
We started with Pamela, and I got so happy with Pamela, because Pamela's just really kind of like, you know, wears thick, thick glasses and is completely unkempt and unruly and unaware of herself. And I got so used to that, I thought, oh, I hate having to go to this glam puss kind of, you know, dragon lady, Poison Ivy. I'm enjoying this so much.
Let's redecorate.
And then once we got into that, and I started to really find that character, I enjoyed that much more. So it was both.
Longer, more orange.
Yolanda Tusing was our hairstylist on the film, and Yolanda had Uma's wigs made by Peter Owen in London. Because of the nature of their color, we really didn't want them to be cartoony. I mean, I know it's supposed to be like a comic book, but we wanted it to be as realistic as possible, and Peter did an awesome job making these wigs.
Enough monkey business. We've got work to do.
Monkey work.
The character Bane was designed by a makeup artist named Brian Pennicus and was assisted by Rick Stratton.
In the comic books, he's just flesh colored. There was never, he had big muscles and big veins, but there wasn't any coloration other than normal skin color. So that's where V. Neil and Joel said, do something that has something to do with the venom being pumped through him to make him that big.
Howdy, folks.
I felt like Roy Scheider in Jaws when he sees the shark for the first time and he says, we're gonna need a bigger boat because this man was huge.
There's the man.
Built a tent for me based on basically a wind tunnel type thing that circulated air because we were going to be airbrushing so much body makeup. We wanted to make sure, even if we were wearing respirators, that both Jeep and ourselves would be comfortable.
I'm a Shakespearean actor by trade.
We would start the makeup by shaving Jeep's torso every day. We'd just shave it, make sure his arms were free and his chest and back were hairless, because when you spray makeup through hair, it's like putting mascara on hair.
Okay, now that Jeep's been shaved and wiped down with alcohol, we start spraying the base color on. And we have to cover up his beautiful tattoos here. This color will base him out so that he'll just be all a flat, neutral color, and then we'll start adding colors back to him to create the look of Bane.
Jeep had to be painted. Everything from his neck down to his belt line, out to his fingertips, every day for months, 6 months I think we were shooting. Boy, we got good at that. Some days it took 2.5 hours, other days when it was getting later in the week, it took us longer.
I look straight at
Tonight's forecast, a freeze is coming.
The good thing about a movie like Batman and Robin is it's so over the top with the characters. The actual correspondence between the different groups that were putting these characters together didn't happen until the last moment, when we were all pretty happy with the look. We put them all together and went, wow, this works.
Hey, freeze. The heat is on.
One great thing about doing these movies is the fact that makeup and hair is a really important part, because the characters are fantasy characters. When you really get into the fantasy of Batman, it's all about, what they look like. So this was fun for me.
When he blows this up in here, we'll have a major piece of this architecture drop away. It won't be like the telescope's crushing its way through it. It'll be like it's shattered and it's already frozen, so it's already fragile.
It isn't whether or not I'm noted for the flawless execution of my effects. It's whether or not the effects elicited the response in the audience that was necessary for the story. We'll shoot Batman going into the top of the Freeze-mobile, and then we'll do the split of the car and it opening up to reveal the rocket. At that point, we have the option of having the door in the rocket, whatever that door is, closed or open, and then we can do Batman entering with the rocket elevated, and you'll have it both ways.
John and I worked incredibly closely. He would call me up and say, come down, take a look at the miniatures, the building of all the miniatures. By that one, there was so many new things to add. Besides Poison Ivy, growing things was Mr. Freeze stuff, and it became huge on that one, which is why we all started even earlier and working together. But incredible. Dykstra's incredible.
What happens with visual effects is this. You talk about it a lot, but then they go off and do some voodoo, and then they bring you the voodoo. and then you work on the voodoo with them, but then they go off and perfect the voodoo, and then it comes back to you. So how he actually did the process, he would have to share with you.
We create three-dimensional models, very simple models, in a computer, and we make motion control moves, meaning we track the camera, it's pan, roll, pitch, and linear motions in CGI. And those become the model for the actual photography, in this case, of miniatures.
Behind us is the miniature of Gotham City, and it's built in 1/24th scale. There's probably 20 different buildings. Many of them are modular in fashion. We have them on wheels so we can move them around the set, rearrange them for different shots, so that the same 20 buildings can be used to represent hundreds of buildings throughout Gotham City.
When you're photographing in motion control, oftentimes you photograph it at a very slow speed, sometimes 2 frames a second. So the only way to see it in real time is to capture it on computer devices such as this, which is called a PAR board. And basically, frame by frame, each image is recorded and it plays it back, or the computer plays it back. We use color video taps so we can get an indication of what the color is like. And even though it's not exactly true to the film, it gives a good idea of what you've got.
Barbara Ling, Bob Ringwood, all of these guys who in their own rights had done lots of stuff were being brought together and asked to work together in a place where his costumes had to be reproduced both in CGI and in reality, and her sets had to be reproduced in CGI and reality and in miniature. So it was like all of a sudden there's all of this overlap of requirement, and communication was critical.
What we have here is actually a shot that combines quarter-scale miniatures, a 60 by 40 translite photographic backing, some live-action green screen characters, and a CG character on a CG motorcycle. And it'll all come together in the final movie to look like a real scene in Gotham, and it will be indistinguishable as to which is which. The city is quarter-scale, the Batmobile is quarter-scale miniature, the characters are obviously live-action, with people standing here and over here who are live-action green screen characters. The photographic backing is the city in the background, and the Robin on the motorcycle riding by is a computer-generated character.
This is the skyboard sequence, and it's been pre-visualized before we start our photography. You really get a sense that you're just in the film, and you're falling and falling and falling and falling as the characters are. You, the audience, is falling as well, and so it's got a lot of dynamics to it. So what we have on the Moviola is the miniature photography that is our version of what you saw in the computer world. And so this is taking the data that the computer created and then tweaking it and working with it, because on a live stage it's a little different than what the images are in the computer world, but basically it's taking the intent of that move and creating it as these background plates. And this photography will then be scanned and taken back to the computer world, and then Mr. Freeze will be, and Robin and Batman will be placed in here. Also, we'll have some smoke that is coming out of the stacks and a lot of other enhancements that create a lot more texture to this sequence.
You had to either design a camera that traveled at the speed of light and stopped in 3 feet, or you had to design a rig that could do motion control at 30 miles an hour, or there was all of this technology involved. When the ability to create images in the digital environment, a pixel at a time, arrived, suddenly that engineering side started to drop away. And it dropped away fairly quickly as the digital environment matured. And it also meant, from a supervisor point of view, it got to be much less an engineer and much more a designer, much more involved in what the content was rather than what the process was to create that content. That's a huge change. And that happened right in there between those two movies.
Batman has to win by being smart. He doesn't have the powers of the other guys, of Superman or any of those guys. So, you know, Val did. Val and Michael had those powers, but I did. They part of my contract, they just said you don't get any superpowers.
Batman is probably one of the most flexible characters I've ever seen in any form of entertainment. Spider-Man is always Spider-Man. Superman is always Superman. Batman is a lot of different things at a lot of different times. Batman's story is fairly grim, but if you don't say that his parents were murdered, you can have a fun, campy Batman.
George Clooney played a warm and fuzzy Bruce Wayne, kind of the guy next door, the guy that all the women love. And it was a completely different interpretation of Bruce Wayne.
George is a huge plus to the picture. He brings a great deal of heart to the Bruce Wayne character, to his daytime character.
Well, I think he was probably what I would call the kinder, gentler Batman, because I think he was the most, in some ways, the most accessible Batman, because, again, he was very comfortable with the kind of wealth and very comfortable being a playboy. You know, that party scene where he's being interviewed. Again, he's just really, he's just really comfortable, and he has that sort of like classic movie star sort of look.
There is a humanity to George, a kindness, a warmth that I think is new, and I think very much needed and very appealing.
Why are all the gorgeous ones homicidal maniacs? Is it me?
He's mischievous, too. So he has a terrible life. He's torn between Elle Macpherson and Uma Thurman. His life is a horror.
I tried to make this character, Bruce Wayne, and Batman, but mostly Bruce Wayne, I wanted him to look and sound like a doctor on a high-rated television show. And I thought, you know, with my acting range, that I'd be able to do that. And I've seen some of the dailies and stuff, and I've seen little pieces of the film, and I think that I achieved that.
There's a wonderful scene where George Clooney says, you know, I love you, old man. I'm paraphrasing here, but it is they all, play it very, very warmly and with a lot of heart. And I thought Clooney, made a very good Bruce Wayne, and no place better than in that scene, and really captured what they were going for with the movie, which was about heart and family and valor and bravery. And you don't have to wear a suit and ride around in a fancy car to be a hero. Sometimes the bravest heroes are the ones who just stoke the home fires and keep everybody sane back in the cave.
There are several Robins that existed in the comic book version. Each Robin, we do play a little differently. From the Dick Grayson version of Robin, who was the orphan who was brought, who went through almost the same life experience that Bruce Wayne did. They had a natural bond there because they both suffered the loss of parents, and that's something that it's unspoken between the two of them. That's a pain that they both share, and therefore it's a motivation between the two of the characters.
Well, with Robin, you get a character who is sort of a younger mirror image of Bruce Wayne. Certainly he's a character Bruce Wayne could have been if tragedy had befallen his parents at another phase of his life. With Robin, you have a character who is just as committed to righting wrongs and avenging the death of his family. However, as a teen, he's got much more intensity and a more hair-trigger temper than Bruce Wayne would ever allow himself.
I want a Robin signal in the sky, all right? I'm tired of living in your shadow. All that ends right now.
Robin is at the point in his career in Gotham. He now has his own fan club. He has people send him all sorts of letters, and he's very big with the girls in Gotham. And he thinks that he should have a sign up in the sky, too. Instead of it just being the bat signal, he thinks that he should have his own logo in the sky.
Where do you think you're going?
It's not a bat light, it's a Robin signal.
He's a scrapper and a fighter, and he's very feisty. As Alfred says to Bruce very early in the movie, you both follow the same star, he just has a different course. And Batman, in the paternal role, does what a lot of us do with younger people, which is he tries to protect him or stop him from doing things that might harm him. And if you've ever tried to do that with a young person, you know it's really a waste of time.
They fight over Poison Ivy. Robin is pretty cocky and thinks that, of course, she's after him and thinks that that's what's driving Batman crazy.
He just doesn't listen, He's just he's a little anxious. I think he's exactly what Batman was probably 10, 12, 15 years earlier, which was, a little more gung-ho, and now he kind of takes his time and thinks about things a little bit more.
Well, I think he's getting a little sick of always being in Batman's shadow. Playing second fiddle to Batman. I mean, he's got his name in the title, which is a big improvement for him, Batman and Robin. But I think he's wondering why it can't be Robin and Batman.
Her background is always real hazy and whatnot, because she's kind of Jim Gordon's daughter, but she's not Jim Gordon's daughter at the same time, depending on which rendition of her backstory, you read. In the TV show, she's the librarian, but in the books, there's no hint of librarian going on there unless they write it in as a nod to the old TV show.
Alicia Silverstone, she's fabulous as Batgirl. Strong and powerful and perfect choice.
Batgirl is just pure trouble. She's trouble in leather. Robin and Batgirl, they have kind of the same personalities. They're both going to just jump in without really thinking about how to save, how actually they're going to get out of situations.
She's just kind of like a little rebel, loner, definitely a loner. She's pretty righteous and defensive, and all for a good cause. She really, really believes that Alfred's being mistreated, and she's come to save him, and that's all she's come to do. And I'm the only one who can see that he's sick, and nobody else is paying attention. And I think these guys are jerks. Like, I can't believe that these guys are having this dear old man as their slave. To me, he's just a slave to them.
She's never done an action film like this, and sometimes it would be so crazy on the set, and they'd be kind of throwing out instructions. She'd be like, "What am I doing? What am I?" You know what I mean? I'd be like, "Just jump and yell," and she'd just kind of like, "Okay," and she'd just jump and yell, and it would work perfect.
I can ride a motorcycle brilliantly, and I can use the computer brilliantly, and I know I can help. So I ask Alfred to suit me up and make me a suit, and he does, and he says he's proud of me for that.
Mr. Freeze began his life in Batman comics as Mr. Zero. He became Mr. Freeze only later on during the TV show when they changed the name. George Sanders was the first one to play Mr. Freeze on the TV series. Otto Preminger played Mr. Freeze as well on the TV series.
Mr. Freeze's character is formidable. Arnold is already formidable, and Mr. Freeze has to live at 0 or below degrees, and he would like the rest of the world to live at 0 or below as well. -10 would be actually perfect for him.
He wants to freeze the world, and he wants to make everyone as cold as Mr. Freeze's heart is, basically.
I think the tragedy of him and his wife and his love for her, and how his heart had literally gone cold because he couldn't find a cure, he couldn't save her, is an amazing story. And unlike Batman, he had a chance to save her. And Batman never had a chance to save his parents, the people he loved as much as Mr. Freeze loved his wife.
Schwarzenegger was a great Mr. Freeze, coming off of some sense of depth to his character, and that maybe in the world of superheroes and supervillains, everything isn't always black and white.
Mr. Freeze is a very popular and sexy character. So all those women are surrounding him. But anytime they make a move on him, any kind of a sexual move or sexy move, he tells them that his, passion thoughts for his bride alone. He really is a man of principles. He is the whole thing that he does, and as evil as he is, but it's all for one thing, and that is for his wife.
One day, in the middle of filming of Batman and Robin, I was invited to the set, and I brought my nephew with me. And, he was maybe 7 at the time, and just see his eyes light up when he was on the Mr. Freeze set, and he got to meet Arnold Schwarzenegger and have a look around, and we saw the image of the girl floating in the tank. It was kind of cool to see that they had interpreted those bits of our animated mythos into the live-action movie. It's kind of fun, on the one hand, thinking that you made the cut, that what you brought to a character or a villain like Mr. Freeze meant enough that they interpreted it into the movie. It's kind of nice being part of the ongoing mythology.
In the 1960s, Batman really had only one femme fatale that he had to deal with, which was Catwoman. And they needed some female characters, and Poison Ivy was the first to emerge as a seductive villainess in the Batman strip.
The introduction of Uma Thurman as Poison Ivy is spectacular. I mean, she's the perfect choice. You couldn't get a better choice than Uma Thurman.
The nature of most Batman villains is that they're dual personalities. They're originally somewhat well-intended. So Pamela Isley is the mad botanist who's slightly cracked and totally engrossed in her work, and she becomes Poison Ivy, who's a polar opposite. Isley's someone insecure and totally out to lunch, and Ivy is just the embodiment of confidence and self-possession.
With Uma playing Poison Ivy, who's a seductress, it gave us a wonderful psychological villainess who better than the most beautiful woman in the world to try to separate Batman and Robin and pit them against each other.
She's blowing a little love dust on us, which she actually didn't have to do. We both fight over Uma anyway. And makes us both want to, kill each other for her, which I understand. And she's something. She comes in the room and ain't nobody else in the scene. And that is the simple truth. Big, tall, beautiful, talented lady.
The great thing about having such a delightfully written character is that no matter what else is going on, when you actually go to work, you're met by something that's strong and encouraging and a lot of fun.
The Bane character in the comic book, he is the master villain that is responsible for breaking Bruce Wayne's back, or breaking Batman's back, crippling Bruce Wayne for life, which was a big change in the comic book. That, wow, crippled superhero. Is Batman gonna fight crime if he's got a broken back?
My guys created Bane. I had a little bit to do with it, mostly as a guy who was in the room with them. But my writers and my other editors created Bane as a guy who was very smart. He was raised in a prison, so he was just as disadvantaged as possible to be. Educated himself, figured out a way to break out, and we played him as like having a huge native intelligence. He was more than muscle. I mean, he was Batman's equal.
Bane came along at a time when I think the comic book creators were looking at a way to throw newer and bigger and more challenging adversaries at Batman. We have seen the criminal masterminds who match Batman with a combination of physical might and cleverness. I think they wanted to go the other way with Bane and do somebody who was just much more of a physical powerhouse that Batman could not overcome.
Bane was one of the characters that my 7-year-old godson taught me about, probably when he was about 5. And Bane is made out of steroids and venom. And he is, we use him in this film as Uma's pit bull. I mean, she just can't kiss everyone to death in Gotham City. It's a lot of people to kiss. And so sometimes she just needs someone to break down a wall. So he's a wonderful addition.